Right, there's our robotic voice. So we would like to start by going around and giving everybody an opportunity to talk about what they discussed during their duo breakout. And as a reminder too, we'd like to let everybody have a turn to speak first, have that opportunity. And then once everyone has had a chance, we can revisit people a second time or third time. But let's try to get to everybody at least once first, everyone who wants to talk anyway. So, so who'd like to begin sharing what they discussed with their duos?
Really fast too, I just want to say, if I miss any of the notes or any comments, please message me directly and I'll be sure to add it to the Miro board.
Great, thank you, Natasha.
Yeah.
You do a great job documenting everything. Thank you very much.
Can I please make a request that everybody put the name of the school that they represent in their name?
Yeah, that's a
Thank
great
you.
suggestion, Millie. Super helpful, yeah. All right, who would like to begin? So what were your reactions to proposal C? You know, what, in your opinion, what works well? What aspects or elements best support your community? And then also thinking of the Southeast as a whole.
I don't mind starting. We talked about, I was with Tanya from Tabor, principal at Tabor, and something that she mentioned that I didn't even think of was the whole school dual language, the potential for the safety impact, right? For families who feel like they have allies that are non-Hispanic or non-Chinese or non-whatever, feeling like they had allies if there was an issue, whereas in a whole school model, they might feel like they're a bigger target, right? That had not crossed my mind. And then we just talked about the enrollment numbers, and when they're low, that takes away from some of the robust alternative programming like band, like, you know, arts, you know, whatever. And so those are some things when myself as a parent, I'm thinking smaller class sizes, great, better instruction, more intentional, but also maybe less robust offerings, right? So
yeah. Yeah, it's kind of where we're trying to hit those targets to make sure that we can offer that robust programming at each school. It's a balance, huh? Yeah. Thank you, Adriel. Would others like to share?
Sure, I'll share.
Thanks, Andrew.
I had the pleasure of sharing some time with Beth, who I always love to share time with because she's so knowledgeable about this stuff. One of the things that we talked about is something that we kind of talked about weeks ago, which is that the numbers for Harrison, I mean, not Harrison Park, but Bridger still do not look correct in terms of what's being shown for the capacity of the building without modulars. Those numbers are not right and probably should be corrected because it's kind of skews this process a little bit. We talked about the opportunity for Bridger to potentially be a K-5 program and how that might support, you know, utilization of the building without modulars if creative science moves there. We also talked about the confusion that the scenarios as presented by PPS start to bring forward in terms of the messaging. As a community member, I don't know what we're aiming for anymore, because we talk about the need to eliminate K through 8. We see the reintroduction of K through 8. We talk about the need for dual strands. We eliminate some dual strands. We talk about the need to have Spanish immersion programs near the Spanish-speaking communities. And the messaging and the direction gets very mixed up, which I think is confusing to the community as a whole. So those are kind of some of the points that we covered. It was really, talking about scenario C, and overall, there's some real advantages to it, and there's some disadvantages to it. But the concern starts to become, how does the community understand what's important and what's not important? Is it a community question, or is it what's best for education, what's best for the students? And we are constantly getting dual messages on this, which make a evaluation of any scenario very difficult.
Yeah, how to balance all of that. So what you said, when you referenced there are advantages to proposal C and disadvantages, speak more about that specifically.
Yeah, it's easier for me when I see the spreadsheet in front of me. So the Bridger seems like a great location for CSI, and the ability of Bridger to, if Bridger, if it is a K-5, the ability for Harrison Park to absorb some of that, if it really can. I mean, it's showing what a 79% enrollment now, would still allow some cross program between Bridger and Harrison Park. So that location seems good. I'd be curious about the impact on like the community programs, the neighborhood program in that scenario. It's an interesting idea to move DLI program to Atkinson. I've always been a big fan of the DLI program at Atkinson, but what happens to the neighborhood kids in that scenario, where I wasn't quite sure where they get moved, but it does allow for a dual strand immersion program at a school that's at a single strand, which we understand to be beneficial for maybe the teachers in those scenarios. Creating the two Chinese immersion programs, one being at, I think it was Harrison Park, and the other being down at, what is that, Woodstock, seems a little bit odd. And maybe, I don't know if that's best for the community or best for those programs. It seems like combining them in one place might be better, but I'd really love to hear from that community on what works best for them. Part of the problem that still exists is in terms of how Hosford is still very crowded. And so something we need to give, it seems, to help bring the population at Hosford down. But then I would also want to see where the population ends up at Kellogg. I could probably keep going, but that's a mouthful right there.
Those are important observations. Thank you. Thanks for sharing those.
Mm-hmm. You're welcome.
Who else would like to talk? Oh, Eddie, yes.
Yeah, didn't know if I need to raise my hand or not, but just in case. Yeah, I think maybe I got to speak with Josh Cody, which spoke with a couple times before. It's always great. Thanks, Josh. Well, before we get to what we talked about, just kind of quick answer. Andrew, you had a question about what the community, I've been in touch with I've come from Woodstock, and the Mandarin immersion program and is at Woodstock. And, the Chinese speaking community has been very adamantly, very strongly for the co-located model. It's part of there's a lot of cultural reasons, there's a lot of safety reasons, being a minority, especially in Portland. A lot of times it doesn't feel safe. They finally have a place they feel safe. And having that ripped out from under them is just, just horrible. But the other thing is also like what I told Josh as well. What was interesting is, we did a lot of polling with our community, neighborhood, and Chinese speaking. And, even in proposal B, where it would turn Woodstock into a whole DLI, Chinese DLI, when asked about that, what was surprising, you think everyone, if they're just thinking about, being self-serving and stuff, that maybe the Mandarin immersion program parents would be fine with proposal B, but they weren't. It was overwhelmingly strongly opposed to a whole school DLI. A lot of that has to do with cultural reasons, safety issues, and also just, being opposed to being in a focus option school, which goes against a lot of our values. And then when we also had a community meeting with Dr. O, I keep mispronouncing her last name, so Dr. O, and we talked about the Chinese DLI strand at Harrison Park, and part of the drive that we were told that wanting to keep that there was because it's still a young program that's still growing. And that's at least what we were told, why one of the drivers for keeping the Chinese DLI, the single strand there, I guess moving to Clark. So that hopefully that answers the question, at least to the best of my knowledge. Yeah, and then the conversation with Josh, sorry to answer the original question, we talked a little bit about, just the mess that moving creative science school, and I think one of the good things is, tell me if I get this right or get it wrong, moving the proposal A and proposal B, like displacing entire neighborhood programs, just almost felt like it was pitting CSS against neighborhood programs. That just didn't feel great. Maybe Bridger was more receptive. Not exactly sure about that. Anyways, the other thing I wanted to mention, that maybe some issues with proposal C, it just seems like a lot of the boundaries kind of need to be worked on, like a lot of the details, is what I kind of have been gathering. But yeah, thank you. That's all I have to say about that.
So you feel like there's some unanswered questions related to the actual boundary lines with proposal C, like it's less defined.
I wasn't able to look at everything because I just got last night and was pretty busy all today. But from at least looking at Woodstock, which is where I'm most familiar with, it just seems like some of the choices of choosing major roadways as natural boundaries was also creating some problems, which obviously was mentioned, but there's definitely a lot of questions. Like, for example, the Woodstock specific one, how that little extension to the east of 60th got kind of cut off, but then so that dropped Woodstock's enrollment. So to fix that, they added this chunk from underneath Woodstock from Lewis, which seems like it created a problem and fixed the problem. But why not? I mean, what was the reason for switching that up instead of just leaving it as is? I don't know which way is better. I'm trying to wrap my head around it. It's just a question. I'm not criticizing or have any judgment. It's just, why did that happen?
There's a whole domino effect, right? That happens. Yeah.
Huge.
Trying to reach that goal of not crossing those major arterial roads. Yeah.
But that area where they cut off from Lewis, that part's a really busy part of Woodstock, versus the original area that got cut off. That part of Woodstock is not as busy. Anyways, it's just a thought. Thank you.
No, thank you. No, I mean, it's interesting to contemplate, like, right, we have all these different goals that we're trying to achieve, and by embracing one, sometimes we have to compromise another. And so how do we approach this, right, where we are able to maximize what's most important?
Can I just offer, I think one of the things that I think in the documents that were sent out, there was some framing questions that were surfaced a little bit, that each of these proposals surfaces different things, right? So that's what you're describing, is the drivers are slightly different. And so you're going to see different things emerge based on what the drivers are of each of the proposals. So I think that's, I have found going back to the driver document has been very helpful to say, here are the things that as a modeling was done were prioritized, right, over other things. And then you start to see what those trade-offs are, both at a localized at a site and then across the system. So I think that you're surfacing the tension points, and they're different tension points based on which proposal you're looking at.
Yeah, absolutely. Well said. Thank you, Margaret.
Hi, this is Michelle.
Hey, Michelle.
I'm a HP parent, so I just want to speak on sort of why our community wanted to keep DLI K through 5 closer to Harrison Park where it currently is. Because we're in the J district, a lot of the native speaking Chinese families live here. And so we felt that going to Woodstock would there would be a barrier, like regarding transportation. Getting there would be pretty far. And then there are also a lot of like low income families in our area, so we would like to keep the program close in. And then as far as what we talked about in our duo, I was with Noel, and I guess what I said was it makes sense to me to have creative science go to Bridger, just being located close. If there are families that go to creative science currently that live nearby. I guess my concern is with capacity, and if creative science was a K through 8, would they be adding modulars, or they be using existing modulars to have all of those students that move?
Well, thanks, Michelle. And Judy, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe that we're using existing modulars that are newer. Is that right?
Yes. Ethan, any additional clarification on that? Just confirmation. And
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think I want to say, like we've heard this in from a couple folks already, and it's a starred takeaway for tonight that we need to be even clearer than we've been on exactly what's being counted at Bridger and what it adds up to. And I think that we can try and highlight that and get that back to folks like right away. But I don't want to confuse it any more tonight. I think I want to meet with Flo and maybe our facilities person who helps provide that and get like the one solid answer. We thought we had it. If we don't, we want to get that back to you right away because clearly it's important.
Great. Josh, you've had your hand up. I'm sorry.
All right, unmute, then the hand. Eddie covered our one-on-one, so that was awesome. But one of the things that did come up in there with the major roads that I hadn't thought of before was, does this present, especially not implementing until 2023, does it implement an opportunity to work with the city to help certain crosswalks? Be able to say, can we partner with them and use their budget to say, hey, let's really make these bright, let's really light them up and make parents more comfortable about crossing some of those streets. So that's one of the bigger pie in the sky kind of things.
That's really interesting thought. Yeah. Like safe routes to school and yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I would quickly interject that I was working as the pandemic came on with South Tabor Neighborhood Coalition representing safe routes to trying to get safe routes to school. And it's a challenge. There's some economic blockers, and I'm not exactly sure how you shake the money free from the state to make that happen. I think it would be great to see some community engagement where people are proactively saying, look, we need there's some simple stuff that can be done to make a lot of these crossings safer. So I'll be quiet now, but I thought that you might be interested in that. I
would think even asking the city and their current millions of dollars in the coffers that they don't know what to do with, except for all of the things we need them to do with it. Being able to say, from the city, let's help these intersections. They're already doing the work to make the ADA accessible and all of those that, maybe there's more that we can do for lighting and secure and making people feel safer in general for the city, but yeah.
I may interject. I work in the facilities and operations department, and that safe routes to school conversation is on the table, cooking very well right now.
Excellent.
Great.
Yes.
And I want to say that in past procedures like this, when we get close to a recommendation, we do interact with Safe Routes to School staff, share it with them, and get their feedback on places where it's aligned with their planning and where it presents opportunities. So it's, we're not really in a place to do that with 3 of these that are still somewhat rough, but I made a note to check in with those folks and see if they're paying attention and how soon we can invite them to be a part of it. Thanks for those ideas.
Great. Josh, saw your hand. Can I'm gonna get to Dan,
Yeah.
then I'll hop over to you. Dan?
I just want to make sure we revisit the numbers at Lewis. So the numbers that are in the graph don't necessarily match up with my current enrollment or expected enrollment. And so with including the amount of students I have in each of the encatchment areas that will go to either Whitman or Woodstock. So if we could just really relook at that, because I have like 66 kids in my encatchment area going to Whitman, and the document only shows 34. So that's a pretty big difference. So I just want to make sure, because I'm worried about what the enrollment will look like at Lewis in terms of how small it will make that building.
Ethan, can you talk about that a little bit? So it's a snapshot in time?
I'm guessing that is, if what you're referring to, Gian, in the graph is the baseline enrollment, which is based off of the PSU forecast. So it could be just a discrepancy between what you're seeing real time on the ground there and what we have forecasted. So keeping that in mind can help that.
Josh, and I'm gonna get back to you. Sorry, I know you had a follow-up comment.
I was going to ask, based on what Judy was talking about with the safe routes to school, is there any information they have in their planning that might help guide us in the beginning, rather than present ours to them and see where we line up to help, allow them to have a bigger part of designing it or helping?
So the Safe Routes to School program will be implemented district-wide, so there's not necessarily a focus right now on this initiative, but it will be collectively implemented at PPS with a focus on all of the districts, if that kind of helps answer your question.
It was just whether or not we could use their information or their guiding principles now, so that we don't implement something that then they recommend we change, or that we could implement or as part of what we're doing, kind of fast forward their process and help them out a little bit and say, hey, we followed your model because we had to do this anyway. But that was it. Thank you.
And drawing the boundaries, yeah. Okay, Dan, your hand's up. Is that from last time, or did you have another? Okay. All right, anyone that we haven't heard from that would like to speak? Or anyone who'd like to speak again then? So in thinking about, as Margaret had mentioned, the idea of being able to extract elements from multiple proposals. What are your thoughts about that? Like if we were to try to maximize the best features of all of these, or look at them in a different way?
I think it's a great idea to focus on what works or what people feel works. It's a great starting point. Well, I think that the whole boundary thing is, I think we have to identify kind of the schools and what's happening where, and then approach the boundaries. Because the boundaries are going to be massaged no matter what, once the schools are identified and the programs are identified that go in.
So start at a program level and then get to the boundaries after, you mean?
Right, and I think we had also discussed at one point that there seemed to be some consensus around trying to keep the boundaries focused on the schools, keeping students in a neighborhood whenever possible. So half mile, 1 mile type radius search around the school for boundaries.
Yeah, what do people think about that?
I'd be curious what Judy thinks, how functionally that works.
Well, we will never be able to assign everyone to a school within 1 mile. There are some households that have multiple schools within a mile and many households that don't have any. So I don't know that it's an all or nothing, but I am intrigued by this approach of sort of focusing on starting with the major sort of program decisions, right? Naming where the big things will be, and then making sure that there are whole and right size neighborhoods, neighborhood lines that support that. If I'm saying sort of, if that's what people are thinking about. And if it is, I guess I'm curious, like I've heard, appreciate Eddie kind of stating that the Chinese speaking community at Woodstock was really opposed to the whole school model, and probably would be more satisfied with this proposal, at least the co-located Woodstock remaining co-location. So is that a plus?
Yeah, I mean, just really quick, like the immediate response I got from the community and the parents and the native speakers were, when they saw proposal C, it was like a huge sigh of relief. They're mostly, I mean, there's some boundary changes that some people were not happy with, but it was definitely like a big sigh of relief. I just have a really, if it's okay to ask right now, a really quick question, especially since Judy, maybe you'd be able to answer this. Are all these, sorry, I think I cut Josh in line. Are all these, I think it was, I remember watching the board meetings, it was kind of up in the air. Are all these, is there a decision yet about students that are currently enrolled in a school, and after 2023, do they suddenly change schools if the boundary shifts, or are they allowed to stay? Has that been answered yet? I forgot.
Well, thanks for that question. And it's always coming up all the time. The answer is we have a policy that says kids can stay, and that the board can modify that and accelerate the change if they think it's deemed necessary. They have to vote to make it different.
Yeah,
Will they vote to make it different? I think that depends on a lot of things. I think it depends on the recommendation of the SEGC, the staff's recommendation, and I think it's going to take a little time to really think through the impact. If there's no change until 2023, and for some of these smaller schools that we may want to be trying to grow enrollment, like if there's no change, if change doesn't start till 2023 and it takes 6 years, like, is that the best pace? So policy is they can stay. The board would have to vote for it to be different. What the board votes on will be shaped in large part by the community, SEGC, and this timing. Long answer.
Oh, thank you, Judy. Another just really quick follow-up is all these numbers, I'm just assuming all these numbers are based on if the changes happen immediately, right? I mean, no student, right? So it's not taking account that the families might be wanting to stay in the school. Right?
No, it's like if you just open your eyes and the school was like this today.
Gotcha.
With the forecast that we expected today, this is what it would look like.
Yeah, that's what I assumed. Cool, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Noelle, you had your hand up.
Hey, so I had a great conversation with Michelle, and then and thought her points were very relevant. To also follow up with, I don't know who was speaking to the keeping things close, because I know that logistically can be hard, but when you have comfort in your community, it's always more of a barrier when we're asking families to go out of that community when they have additional barriers in their life. And so I do agree with the sentiment of that. I know in Judy's world that can be hard because I know how PPS is laid out. But I missed the last meeting, and from what I could gather from it, it sounded like, because I work in special education for Portland Public Schools, it sounded like some of the talk around the special education programs or services were discussing that there was a full continuum in our schools for special education. I don't know if that was maybe some answers to some questions around what those programs look like, but we don't currently have a full continuum in the schools that we're looking at, and in a lot of our schools. And so I guess one of my thoughts is that even if there are program classes within those buildings where, students from out of those boundaries are being placed in those classrooms. But I know PPS is both in the vision as well as in our special education department vision is to have a full continuum within those buildings. And I know some of the barriers around that can be capacity. So just keeping some of that in mind when we're thinking about if we're transitioning to making sure that students with special education services are not being asked to leave their school and go somewhere else because that's where the service resides, but that we want to provide those services within their neighborhood schools so that we're not displacing them and adding an additional barrier outside of the fact that, they have learning differences. So making sure that we have that in mind when we're looking at capacity within the schools. So what will full continuum look like when we actually reach that goal? And will that be possible within the models we're looking at? And I know we'll have follow-up focus groups and whatnot, but just making sure that even just logistically within our facilities conversations, that we will have those options for students who experience disability, and that if they're in a DLI, whether it's whole school or co-located, will those opportunities be there so that they can take part in both? And then it's not just one or the other.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, Noelle. And I can say, having worked on the long range facilities plan recently, that was a program goal of special education was to be able to.
It is.
Yeah.
And so while we do have program classes in certain buildings we're talking about right now, which will be could or could not be impacted, if that is within a few years of happening, because clearly we're huge, so those things move very strategically and often slowly, just like this conversation does. Just making sure that we're considering that as we go, so that it's not a oops afterthought that these students are not now impacted because the school is at a certain percentile and we can't actually have that support here based on like something like space.
Yeah. And Ethan, was that, just curious, was that part of the modeling at all to see what the impacts would be to special education students? I don't know if that was part of the analysis at all.
Yeah, we do have special education percentages for each of the schools. I think probably Judy's gonna be able to better explain which exact programs might be included in that SPED and which are maybe just included de facto. But we do have those SPED percentages as they move around between each scenario.
Yeah, I can just reinforce that the model takes into consideration the programs that exist today, but not necessarily the vision for placing additional programs in the future. Additional capacity makes space for that, as well as expanding early education opportunities aligned with, state funding that's now coming in for more universal pre-K. So there are opportunities that come when there's space on a campus. I think there's still that tension between what makes space on a campus for a small number of kids or younger kids versus being able to have enough students to generate that strong and, well-balanced program that you want for all your kids. So, and Deanne, I know, knows this really well, and maybe some of the other principals in the room who are hosts, their schools community includes students who are in special ed focused classrooms, and sometimes probably would love to have space for even more students instead of not.
And to that, I think when I say full continuum in all schools, when you look at our special education model goals and visions, if you were to take the numbers of students and place them back, like in focus classrooms, and place them back into their neighborhood schools, it's a lower amount than when you clump them and put them in an institutionalized type classroom. Does that make sense? So those numbers aren't going to be as high as a school that is hosting a classroom that is not full of neighborhood students that experience disability. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So when we do that and we talk about full continuum, we will most likely not see like a need for a CB, an SES, an ISC classroom. And I know I'm using acronyms because I'm sure we're running out of time, but it will be more of a fluid concept of service and a more inclusive concept of service in practice and those types of curriculums, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So we won't be needing to add to every school, I don't believe, a segregated classroom or focused classroom that needs to have, up to 12 students. It'll look different than that.
Yeah.
So that's a good thing, but it's like when both systems are in transition, making sure we are just talking about that. Sorry, I have a sick kid. Do you hear my kid in the background?
Yeah.
Logging off.
Okay.
I'm not going, just the meeting.
Oh, okay. Let's see, Josh, I think, and then did we have, Jennifer, you put your hand down though, and we haven't heard from you yet. Do you want to go, Jennifer, real quick? Or she's.
I'd like
No,
to
I think Nicole. Thanks, Andrew. I think Nicole answered my question. I'm not super clear on what the vision and direction is for the full continuum of services for special education, but I will say that having focused classrooms and that level of support available to our native speakers of Spanish and other languages, but our highest population in Spanish is really important. And I can see we're closing in 7 seconds. So maybe we'll talk more again about that.
Thank you all. Welcome back, fellow Columbia participants. We were ending, Jennifer was speaking, she was kind of mid-sentence, and then Josh, I know, had his hand up. Jennifer, did you want to finish up your point?
Sure. I just wanted to illustrate the fact that within our district, we do have a need to have a full spectrum of SPED opportunities available for native speakers, particularly of Spanish. Currently, there are some placed in immersion schools and some are not. And like I said, I don't really know what Nicole was referring to as far as the long-term vision for more inclusion or a full spectrum of offerings. But my experience has been that we often, or maybe not often, but we have had a fair number of families of native Spanish speakers who have to end up choosing between supporting their student
who has a higher level of need for special education versus developing their native language. And just to illustrate that point, at Atkinson, we have 2 students right now who are in Spanish immersion, whose parents do not speak English. They're native speakers of Spanish. They do require a higher level of support than general education. However, their needs are being supported by a bilingual paraeducator so that they can maintain their native language. Otherwise, they would lose that connection and identity and ability to communicate with their parents. So that I just wanted to, yeah.
Oh, so those intersectional identities, right? Like having impact in both of those and resources. Noelle, I see you have your hand up. I know Josh was waiting too. Noelle, did you want to respond to Jennifer though?
I was just going to really quick. Sorry, Josh. Yes, that's a very good example. All of the schools that have a DLI program have what's called a learning center in it. So if your needs, which are about 80% of students with disabilities, can usually have their needs met within a learning center, which means you go to your neighborhood school and you receive special education services, whether it's push in, pull out from a learning center model with a special educator within that classroom. Then we have focus classrooms, and that's the students that have to make the choice. And so having, when I say full continuum, just more robust services that are not segregated, where we have to send students to a program as opposed to having that service within their school, is the reason those students within the DLI program have to make that really inequitable choice. So resolving that is the goal.
Thank you. And Josh, thanks for your patience.
Oh, no, no problem. It was just a clarifying question of what a full continuum was, what that meant to the lay person. But it sounds like it's the offer of the services and not a headcount capacity thing that we need to be accounting for.
Yeah, so students who have a disability that has more of an impact, where they may need a higher level of special education services, in our current model, we have them in focus classrooms, and that's considered a placement, which means the district, and this is a nationwide thing, but which means the district can place you where they have that current service. And so that may be in a different school, because we don't have all those classrooms in every school that we have within PPS currently. And so the goal is to make those services more fluid, to work with general educators to have a universal design for learning, and make sure that we're doing supporting them in supporting students with disabilities, as opposed to segregating them and saying this is where you get your needs met. So it's more of a service instead of a place. Does that make sense? So it's just a more it's a more inclusive model, it's a more equitable model. It doesn't mean students will get less service, which sometimes scares families, but it would allow students majority of the time to remain in their neighborhood school. And some of the barrier to that is also funding from the federal level, because the Individuals with Disability Education Act is not fully funded. But within our district, I think if we make those goals, like a lot of districts moving to this model, is, just the best outcome for students. But that's what I mean when I say full continuum, is so that we don't have to push a student out of their neighborhood school to get a service when that service should reside in their school. So we're not displacing them.
Thank you. No, that's really helpful. I know we have a couple hands up, but before we move forward, we haven't heard from Carmen or Ellie. I just wanted to give each of you the invitation to speak if you'd like to share.
Thank you. I'll speak. I had to leave the meeting and come back. Is this another question that we're answering now? What's the question that we're answering?
It's a follow-up from our last breakout, so it's another opportunity to come together. But we're looking at elements of Proposal C. What works well, what best supports your community, and then also looking holistically at all the proposals and are there elements that we like or don't like, and how these might come together for an ideal solution.
Yeah, looking at the broad picture, I'm personally finding all of this to be pretty overwhelming, like all the data and the numbers. and all the conversations around DLI and CSI. I'm trying to focus on my school right now. And I wish I could say that we had like a really general consensus at Marysville about what is best for us, but we're still kind of coming to terms with that and making sense of all three of the proposals. I would say that I think that C is the most attractive to us because of the geographical boundaries. It makes the most sense. Nobody is going to be having to cross 82nd. So I would personally at this point would like to advocate for C for Marysville. However, a lot of our BIPOC students currently come from east of 82nd. And I hate for them to have to be displaced from our community because that's who we're supposed to be serving here. So I don't have a strong statement to make tonight, but I did want to say that I'm actively involved at Marysville, and we are having very active conversations there. And yeah, that's really all.
Thank you. No, it's an interesting perspective. Thank you. And Carmen.
Hello, everybody. I haven't had an opportunity to check in with my community because I've been out of town for about a week and a half, 2 weeks. But I'm trying also the same, just trying to look over all the information and try to understand it a little bit better. I did have some good conversation in my duo group, and they were parent from the creative science. And so, I mean, looking at what I can see, I see that it seems to keep more of the communities together and less of the crossing of roads and things like that. But I feel like either way it affects, I mean, it's difficult at this point. I feel like it's very difficult just because it's breaking apart. It may not be breaking maybe the Lent community apart as much in this sense, but it is breaking apart other communities and the safety that they feel within their own community and having them move schools or in that type of thing. So I'm kind of a little bit overwhelmed too with the decisions being made here, just because I think that it's important to stay focused on what is best for the students. And right now it feels so, I think someone else mentioned the goals at the beginning were set one way and now it's becoming a little contradictory of what were the goals. So that's also a little bit of a concern.
Thank you, Carmen. Andrew.
Yeah, there we go. I did want to follow up with Jennifer, but in terms of being a rep from Mount Tabor, I do want to say that the enrollment numbers in C, although I personally I think C's got some real good things going on, for Mount Tabor look a little low, and I'd like to understand eventually how robust programming can be maintained there. But in terms of what I want to ask Jennifer about is when I'm looking at the numbers for Atkinson, and in proposal C, it goes to a dual language immersion for 2 strands, which I believe leaves a single strand of neighborhood. The neighborhood numbers are the same as the dual language immersion numbers, and I'm wondering if that's accurate.
Yeah, honestly, Andrew, I'm not quite sure. I brought that up earlier this week. I don't know what those numbers are based on. We only have 3 strands right now. We have 2 strands of neighborhood and 1 strand of immersion. And so it does seem like in proposal C that this would then leave Atkinson with 2 strands of immersion and 1 strand of neighborhood, which in turn would be back to a single strand of neighborhood. I also received the data last night and have not been able to look at all the details. But I did bring that up. I mean, the thing that I think is tricky is on the one hand, we have building capacity numbers, and then on the other hand, we have number of classrooms. And I think that, you know, the principal at Kellogg brought this up earlier on in the process that, sure, we could be at, 90% capacity or 80% capacity. But maybe they're considering moving art and special education and counseling and, these different, maybe it's removing the intensive skills. I'm not sure where the classrooms would be coming from.
Right, okay, yeah, well, yeah, those, again, that didn't seem correct. And I think to the point that I kind of would like this group to convey back to the larger group, because I say it too much, is that what I hear is that this is moving quickly and therefore accurate information isn't being presented, which seems like that's a reason to not provide the SEGC with the correct numbers and the correct information. And it becomes very misleading and distracting and makes it hard for volunteers to focus on the work at hand, because we're being given information that is incorrect because we're moving once again too quickly. And I think it's okay to take a breath and get accurate information, even if it means skipping a week. My 2 cents for the week.
Thank you. Thank you, Andrew. Michelle, I saw that you had your hand up earlier. I know it's not up right now, but did you want to share something?
I might be changing the subject, but before we close out, I just want to know going forward how the community feedback from the focus groups, how we're going to learn about that, and what role our group will have as far as like, changing the proposals. Will we learn about the feedback in January? Is that the plan?
Judy, you want to, you will learn about the feedback. Yes. Would you like to talk more?
Yeah, so there is going to be a little bit of discussion about that in a few minutes, right? At least I think that the last item on the agenda tonight. The intent is to have lots of opportunity for community engagement that covers all the 3 proposals. We're not asking anyone, including you, to pick any of these intact, but to emphasize what works and what doesn't. And then you do have one more meeting in December. So on December 16th, we believe we'll be able to share summaries. And there'll be time for you to start talking about like what you heard, especially what you heard that was new, right? That you hadn't heard before, and how it's moving you towards like maybe some new ideas or a putting components together. And then we've, as you heard tonight, we've got a little work to do to figure out what the January schedule is, to give you enough time to come up with that last proposal. But I would say December 16th is going to mostly be about what you heard from the community. Oh, sorry to take so much time there.
Thank you. I just thought we were all saying goodbye, so let's sneak that in.
No.